So today we are going to look at the cabinet system of government. It's also called the parliamentary system of government. Our definition cuts, our objective cuts across the following: state the meaning of the cabinet system, mention its features, state its merit and demerits. So a cabinet system or parliamentary system may be defined as the system of government in which the head of state is different from the head of government. The head of state is different from the head of government, right? So the idea is that it is the opposite of a presidential system where both the head of state and the head of government is just one person. So there is no strict separation of power between the executive and the legislative. In the presidential, there is a strict separation of power between both. As a matter of fact, the people elect the president directly or indirectly. But in the parliamentary system, the people don't elect the president. They elect the party now picks the president. So real executive powers are vested in the Council of Ministers who are headed by the Prime Minister. And the legislative serves as the source of authority for the executive. So the executive is part of the legislature in the parliamentary system. In a presidential system, the executive is totally separated from the legislature, right? Both in person and office, totally separated. So the prime minister exercises real executive power and is regarded as the head of government, while the queen or king is the head of state and performs ceremonial functions. So most countries that settle for this parliamentary system, maybe they used to be monarchies in the past, like have monarchs in the past. So when they shifted to a democratic system of government, maybe because of the love the people had for their monarchy system, for their kings and queens and whatsoever, they now decide to leave those heritage, their custom, the heritage of their culture, leave the kings and queens, just ceremonial function, while the government that oversees their day-to-day affair is run by an elected prime minister. That's what I think countries like Britain, Italy, Spain, and the rest did. So Nigeria practiced this system in the First Republic. That means between 1963 to the first military coup. That was our First Republic. Now, what are the features? The head of state is different from the head of government. That's the point. While in presidential, it's fused together. There is no strict separation of power. In presidential, there is. The prime minister is the head of government, while the king or queen is the head of states. Their functions is ceremonial. Prime minister exercises real executive powers. He is the one that runs the country from day to day. While the head of state, who's either the king or queen, performs ceremonial functions. Now, the prime minister and all his cabinet ministers are chosen from the legislature, and they form the parliamentary executive. So you see, that means the prime minister can only choose his party members from the legislature to become ministers. You will see the difference when we get to the merits and demerits. The executive is directly responsible to the legislature, while in presidential, it's responsible to the people, right? So and so on and so forth. So what are the merits of the parliamentary system? It reduces dictatorial tendencies because the legislature can control the executive. They can pass a vote of no confidence and get the executive sacked. Now, therefore, it fosters correlation between the executive and the legislative. So they have to work hand in hand because one depends on the other and vice versa. This system is less expensive to run because in presidential system, there's duplication of functions. But in parliamentary, most often, there is just one central government that runs everything. Right? There is the presence of an opposing party in a parliamentary, so also in a presidential. But the opposing party in parliamentary is part of the government, while in presidential is not. Now, the prime minister can easily be controlled and he or she is responsible to the parliament, not the people. So popular participation can't work in a parliamentary system of government. Let's take note of these points I'm trying to mention here right now. So there is absence of friction because both functions are merged together. The executive and legislature are fused together. So there's no need for or no room for friction or competition or rivalry between the executive and the legislature. So the principle of collective responsibility that applies in the cabinet, this is the demerits now. Now, there's what we call the principle of collective responsibility. That means if there is a big mistake or whatsoever that is done by a minister, it can affect the ruling party in the cabinet. It can cause them to lose their power, and then an election can be conducted. So we call it collective responsibility. In the presidential, it's individual responsibility. The president can fire you if you mess up as a minister. So it encourages mediocrity, since the prime minister in the appointment of ministers is limited to members of his party. So in a parliamentary, because the prime minister picks the ministers from the legislature, and it is restricted to his party members. So they may not pick the best hands, but they can only pick what his party can afford. Okay, so because of the collective responsibility in the parliamentary system, it is difficult to apportion blame to any member of the cabinet who's at fault, you see? So because everybody is going to be blamed, even the person who actually committed the crime, who's responsible, gets to have an easy way out, right? It is less democratic, since the prime minister was not elected by the people. So popular participation and the likes doesn't thrive here. So the prime minister has the uncontrollable power of the prime minister in dismissing any minister who he or she wishes to, can lead to arbitrary dismissal. So the prime minister can lay off his ministers here, and because the power to do so is not checked, it can lead to doing so arbitrarily. That means dismissing them at will, maybe without good reasons for doing so. Now, since the legislature can dismiss the entire cabinet through a simple vote of no confidence, it leads to uncertain future. So you can't focus, settle down, and get the job done. You may be trying to balance yourself to ensure you don't offend the people you shouldn't offend. Thereby, you can't make right decisions. You can't bring about positive changes, right? So you are uncertain how long you are going to last. So you can't even make meaningful impacts, right? These are some of the demerits of the cabinet or the parliamentary system of government. So we looked at the meaning of the cabinet system of government. We looked at its features. We looked at its merits and demerits. If you have any question, put it in the comment section. I'm going to be there to answer ASAP.